In this video, we're going to finish up the history of semiotics and we're going to um, bring us up to date. So we finished the last lecture when we were talking about 1450, when we talked about the discovery of movable type. So just to refresh your memory, we're talking about movable type being that lead, those lead pieces of metal, those pieces of metal that are lead with the letters carved into it and how they could use those to print multiple pages all at once. So I may not have told you about lead though. Why did they use lead? Well, number one, lead is very heavy. It weighs 0.41 pounds per cubic inch. So that is pretty heavy. You could have 2 cubic inches and it would weigh over a pound. So it is very heavy. So it's not going anywhere. But that's really not why lead was used because it's also soft and it can be damaged. So they had to be replaced occasionally, the letters, especially if you used them a lot or if some kind of debris got in there and scratched the letters. So they did have to be replaced occasionally. But the reason that lead was actually chosen was because of the low melting point that lead is at. It melts at 622 degrees Fahrenheit. You could practically melt that on your stove. It's just a very low temperature because metals, like steel, for instance, is way up in the 2000 degree range. So that was an easy to get, cheap, low melting point metal. So that is why it was chosen. So there is, of course, the problem with lead poisoning, but quite honestly, in 1450, nobody knew that lead poisoning was a thing. Lead was cheap, so that is why the metal foundries used it to make that type that we were using that changed the world. Movable type actually caused a change in the way people lived, the way people thought, just basically changed everything, brought them into the modern era, actually. So, what is the Renaissance? The Renaissance was a widespread revival of classic art and learning. Remember, before the movable type, before the Renaissance, only the religious, the rulers, or the rich had access to education and knowledge. After the printing press, the masses could access books. They were very cheap and they could, suddenly knowledge was within their reach. The period right after, on the heels of the Renaissance, was the Enlightenment. So they kind of overlapped to a degree. That particular period, the Enlightenment, emphasized reason, science, and individual rights. Individual people. Challenging traditional authorities was the real turning point for the modern Western culture. In my opinion, the printing press was actually more impactful than the computer. So let's look at the timeline. 50,000 BC, we started with oral language. 17,000 BC, we started cave drawings. And then 5,000, written language. 1,005, 105. When you start saying all those thousands, it's hard to get off of that track. The 105 BC, we had the invention of paper. 400 AC, AD, we started having illuminated books that people were doing by hand. And by 1450, we had movable type that could print books in a matter of hours rather than a matter of months. But let's look at that time frame. That is 51,450 years. That is a long time that we went from only speaking to making books. Very long time. So now we're going to talk about from 1450 until today. So the first thing that was invented, the next thing that was invented after movable type that was really noteworthy for communication was photography. The first photograph that was recorded was this photograph. It was simply called View from the Window at La Grasse. So this guy, and I'm not going to try to say his name because my French is terrible and I don't have the right, I have a Texas accent, not a French accent. But he was in France and he did this this experimentation and finally was successful sometime between 1826 and 1827. What he did was he used a metal plate, and let's see if I have. It just says metal plate. It didn't say what kind of metal. Anyway, he coated a metal plate with bitumen, which is coal related, diluted with lavender oil. Of course, they're in France. Of course, they're going to use lavender oil. But for some unknown reason, that was light sensitive. So he used that to make this photograph. The exposure time was probably days, and the camera that he used was probably much like a pinhole camera. So the next photograph that was of note was by British inventor Fox Talbot. He produced this photograph in 1834 without a camera. What he did was that he brushed light sensitive silver chloride onto paper and then laid, these are just, it looks like it's asparagus or something like that, or the some kind of ferny light little plant that he put on there and exposed it in the sunlight and then used chemicals to develop it. So then the next notable thing was in 1832. That was the telegraph. I know that all of you've watched a Western and they go into the telegraph office and they say, send this message, and they tell them what their message is. And the guy gets on his little thing that goes click, 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 click. Well, that's a telegraph. And the way that they sent messages back and forth over wires was through a system called Morse code. Samuel Morse uh, came up with the Morse code. It's a series of dashes and dots. The only Morse code I know is for SOS. It's dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. That's all I know. Some people still learn Morse code these days, just in case something happens, and that's the only way that they can communicate with along, long distances. So they had wires strung between the stations, and this little instrument right here was connected to the wire, and those dashes and dots would be sent through sound waves to the next one. So it was quite amazing because back then they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have any way to communicate long distance other than someone either running by foot or somebody riding a horse to give messages to the next town over. So in 1876, it got even better. Alexander Graham Bell was awarded the first patent for the telephone. And the reason I say this in that way is not because he didn't invent it, because he did, but there were a lot of people that were working on this kind of thing, and it was sort of like a moon race. They had whoever got to the finish line first was going to be credited with it. So Alexander Graham Bell was accredited for that. He Yeah, he was awarded this first successful patent. All right. Then in 1887, Thomas Edison was awarded the first patent for the phonograph. Thomas Edison used the combination of the to make the phonograph with the telegraph and the telephone. There was sound waves involved, and there were it, anyway. That's how he managed to do it. It was not really like he invented it out of thin air. It was like he took two existing technologies and came up with a different use for those two things put together, which is really pretty clever. All right, the next thing that came along that was of note for communication was silent movies, and that was in 1891. So Thomas Edison, again, along with I can't say that name right, Lumiere brothers, worked on machines that projected the images. They took photography and they took the sound, not the sound, but the sending through a light machine, a machine that had light shining behind it. It led to the silent movie era. And that era ranged from 1894 to 1929. The next thing was the radio. And this one was invented by Marconi. He was an Italian inventor, and he had the first proved feasibility of a radio communication. He sent his first, he actually invented it in in 1902. That's when he got his first patent, when he got a patent. But he actually sent and received his first signal in Italy in 1895. You probably know his biggest competitor. His name was Tesla. He had an operating radio before Marconi, but he was not very good at doing his paperwork. And so although he was the actual inventor of the radio, he neglected to file for a patent, so he did not get credit for this invention, even though he was ahead of Marconi. In 1927, we had talking movies come to the forefront, and that was it was they called it sound on film work. So he was Tiger Stedt, I think is how you say his name, was granted the German patent for his sound on film work. And the same year, he demonstrated a film that was made with the process to an audience of scientists in Berlin. So you see, things are going really fast now. Okay, 1927 also, two inventions in the same year. Philo Taylor Farnsworth II. He was born in Beaver, Utah. Um, he was an American inventor who developed the first all-electronic television system. And about that television, we have televisions nowadays that are so thin. I mean, they're just like an inch thick now. But these televisions were really huge because they had these glass blown tubes inside of them that had to be, all of them had to be working so that the TV would work. And if one went out, then you had to get a new tube put into your TV. It was kind of amazing that it ever worked with all those tubes. But anyway, the next thing was 1965, a pretty long leap there. We had some things going on then. We had World War II, and we had the Korean conflict, and then we were even into Vietnam by this time. But 1965, the VCR was created. His name was Charles Paulson Ginsburg. Don't know if he's related to the Supreme Court judge or not. I looked and I could not find any connections, but with a name like that, they had to be related. Anyway, he's the one who is known as the father of the video cassette recorder. That, from before that, I know that you can't believe this, but people had to actually remember when a TV show was coming on and sit down and watch it at the time in real time, or you didn't see it. And you didn't have YouTube where you could go back and watch it later, or Hulu, or any of those other things that you could watch it the next day without commercials. It was a different world, completely different world. But see that machine that he's standing next to? That is the VCR. See how humongous that looks, like a really enormous copy machine. So the next really big thing that happened was the cell phone. I remember when this happened. I was actually working for a real estate guy in Dallas, and he was the first person I ever knew that had a phone in his car. And he actually had one of those brick-like things that looked really similar to this, but it was something that was installed into his car. He could not carry that with him. Who would want to? Those things weighed a ton. They were so big and bulky. I had one at one time, and it was very, very hard to carry. But anyway, in 1994, Martin Cooper, he was an engineer with Motorola, developed the first handheld phone that could be connected through Bell's AMPS. So Motorola launched the DynoTAC in 1984. So that was a huge leap. There was a quote that Cooper said that I thought was really interesting. He said, "I have to confess that the widespread use of cell phones would have been such a stretch at the time when it was invented, um, because those phones in 1983 cost over $3,500, which is the equivalent of about $7,000 today. But we did envision that someday the phone would be so small that you could hang it on your ear or even have it embedded under your skin. Well, we're not to the skin yet, being popular. Let's hope that that doesn't happen because as often as we change our phones these days, we would be having that removed and a new one put in really often. So I don't want to do that. But anyway, I don't think Martin Cooper had any idea how popular cell phones would become. All right. So the next really big invention was 1994. Tim Berners-Lee was a British scientist. He invented the World Wide Web. We call it the internet now. In 1989, he was working at CERN, and they had a problem of being able to share files with scientists in universities all around the world. So he came up with this system of being able to connect computers together so that they could all look at the same information in the same time. So I want you to remember something. It took 51,450 years to go from oral language to movable type. That is a long time. And then it took from 1450 when we got movable type to when we got the internet. That's 544 years. That's still an awfully, awfully long time, even though it's so much shorter than that first part of the timeline. But look how much it shrunk. But now, let's take a look at the timeline between the web in 1994 until today. That's 31 years. Everything is getting faster and faster and faster. And I'll bet you in 10 years, in 5 years, that everything that we have today is going to be obsolete because that's how fast technology is going. So I am not going to go through, there's so many of these that are happening. I'm not going to go through them quite as thoroughly as I did with the others because I mean, there is an invention practically every day. So I'm just going to hit some highlights. Okay. I don't want to make this video hours and hours long. So I think the first notable thing, as far as I'm concerned, in 1997 was when the first social media platform was launched, and it was called 6 Degrees. I don't remember the 6 Degrees that much. It was more, I remember the game that was launched about at the same time. It was a really popular game, and it was one of those cultural phenomenons that captured everybody for about 15 minutes. It was based on the small world theory. Let's see. Yes, I do have a slide for that. So the way that it started was it was called the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. You probably have heard of the actor. He's not nearly as popular, nor does he make as many movies as he used to. But the premise was that any actor could be linked with Kevin Bacon in six or less connections through movie appearances. My daughter and I were huge fans of movies of the day, and Kevin Bacon was practically in every single one of them. I mean, I don't know how the man worked. He never slept, apparently, because he was always filming movies. But you literally could connect any actor to Kevin Bacon with six or less connections. Most of the time, it was one or two. So that was the first internet, the first social media that was created. So let's go back to the timeline. Okay, so in 1999, the phrase Internet of Things was coined. And I hope that all of you are familiar with that term. The Internet of Things refers to the network of physical devices, our vehicles, our appliances, and other objects that are embedded with sensors, software, and network connectivity. It is literally in everything. My washer and dryer are part of the Internet of Things. I have a glass kiln that I'm sorry, not the glass kiln. I have a ceramic kiln that is connected to the internet. I can monitor it anywhere. I can go off and I can set it and I can go 50 miles away and I'm watching it and monitoring what it's doing. I could turn it off if it suddenly got crazy. So it's the Internet of Things has really blown up. I'm not so sure that there was that many Internet of Things back in 1999, but they sure predicted the future. Let's get back to the timeline. In the turn of the century, sorry, the millennium, new technology exploded. There was 3G cell technology, there was Facebook, and there was YouTube. Stephen Jobs' invention of the iPhone in 2007 put a computer, a camera, a video recorder, and all the music and knowledge in the world in our hands, and we haven't looked up since. In 2012, there was the first Zoom call. And also in 2012, deep learning there was a big breakthrough in deep learning for image recognition, reads face recognition in that, and we hardly even noticed that. There was an introduction of something called the Google Glass in 2013. Okay, I'm behind there. Google Glass in 2013. Really, it was a blip on the horizon. Nobody ever really paid that much attention to it. But the reason I did was because I was in one of the early adopters. I had to travel to Los Angeles and I got to have a tour of the Google office at Venice Beach, and I was like bestowed my very own glass. I was a big nothing burger. It didn't work very well because it only worked with Android phones, and I have been an Apple person since the beginning of the internet. So it was really a big nothing burger. But it was exciting to be chosen. They were just too far ahead of their time. They just jumped the gun a little bit on it. Um, Wearables are not there yet. I would say that Apple Watches are the closest thing that could be considered a successful wearable device, but there's still no cigar for me on that one. I don't care for it. I it's gonna have to be a lot smarter before an adapter again. Okay. So there's all these other things. There's 5G, there's OpenAI, and that has basically been the only thing we've been talking about for the last 5 or 6 years. We've been talking about it for 30 years, but now it's actually coming to reality. So AI is the big item right now. So you're going to need to buckle up because it's going to be a wild ride. So in 31 years, we have gone from the beginning of the WWW era to AI. So I want you to go to, let's see, to this link. And the link is going to be in Canvas, so you can actually see it. I want you to watch this little short from a little movie that I really enjoyed a lot called 2001: A Space Odyssey. This particular scene that I want you to see is where Hal, the AI computer that's on board the spaceship, decides that he's going to take over the ship. And I want you to see how that goes. So be careful, my friends. Next up is our own personal semiotic journey. So I'll see you in a bit.